Whether you know him as the Lord of the Rings, the Lord of Darkness, or the Lord of Werewolves, there's no denying that the Dark Lord is worth the fear his name instills in the hearts of humans, elves, and fans of Middle-earth. His name is not something that could be spoken lightly. His power is mighty, and his actions are heinous. So with that in mind, today let's take a gander and look into the anatomy of this fearsome man and learn what we can about him. But before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. Who is Sauron, the Dark Lord? It's no secret that Sauron has been around for a long time. But just how long has he been around for? Well, the Nameless One has been around since the beginning of creation. The Supreme Being, LOTR, created the first ever angels in this world. These angels were known as Ainur. 14 of these Ainur became Valar, the ones who controlled the shaping of Arda. The remaining Ainur came to be known as Maiar, the ones who accompanied the Valar. Sauron, originally named Mairon, was a Maiar. He was a lesser angelic spirit, but he was the greatest of the bunch. He was the mightiest Maia of the Vala Aule, the smith. Under his tutelage, Mairon learned a lot about smithing and handiwork, becoming Aule's most gifted craftsman. When Eru Ilúvatar created Mairon, he was pure and uncorrupted. Mairon's biggest virtue, his unique selling point, if you want to put it that way, was his love of order and perfection. He hated anything that was wasteful. Now, these are good qualities, but when you fall into the eyes of evil people, these good things end up becoming your weakness. And that's the exact thing that happened to him. Mairon realized that his ambitions, his goals, and his desires would remain unfulfilled if he went down the path alone and without any allies. So he decided to ally himself with Morgoth, who back then was known as Melkor, one of the greatest of the Valar, the greatest angelic spirits. Mairon thought that Melkor would be the greatest and mightiest ally that he would get, so he didn't mind. But these allies were not on the same page. Melkor wanted to destroy Middle-earth completely. However, Mairon had other ideas. Mairon wanted to dominate the will and mind of the creatures that called Middle-earth their home. Mairon thought that it would be for their own good if the creatures submitted themselves to him. His love for order and perfection became the one thing that dominated his mind. He had designs in his head that he wanted to take shape in front of his eyes rather desperately. But in order to make sure everything fell into place and everything worked out perfectly, he had to gain a lot of power. So he joined hands with Melkor for good and became his chief agent. At first, Mairon was able to maintain a rather amiable relationship with the Valar. However, underneath that friendly face, he was working as a spy for his master, informing him of every move that the Valar were going to make. When Melkor finally managed to escape his strongholds in the Middle-earth, Mairon bid his Valar and Maiar companions goodbye by declaring his allegiance with Melkor. Mairon was now a foe of the Valar. After cutting off all ties with the Valar and Maiar, Mairon became solely focused on helping his master. He commanded the fortress of Angband. Throughout the First Age, Mairon helped Melkor by creating orcs, trolls, and other despicable creatures in the heinous depths of Utumno as a sick and twisted mockery of the children of Ilúvatar. When the Battle of Powers started, in the early days of the fight, there was resistance in Angband against the Valar. This was actually a decoy to distract everyone from Melkor's actual movement, and this whole operation was led by Mairon. Melkor brought all his troops to Utumno unnoticed, thanks to this decoy. Despite that, eventually both Angband and Utumno fell, and Melkor was captured, but his favorite lieutenant was nowhere to be found. Turns out, Mairon knew that the Valar would be busy capturing Melkor and removing him from Middle-earth. Using that as a distraction, he made his escape. But that doesn't mean he gave up on his dreams of control. Oh no. With the orcs under his command, Mairon rebuilt Angband. He started becoming rather infamous in his own right. The Sindar elves of Beleriand called him Gorthur, while the others of the Eldar called him Sauron, the name we know him by. His given name, Sauron, means the Abominable, which is a derogation of his original name. By the time Melkor returned, now known as Morgoth, the host of Angband was ready with its very own army of orcs, and Sauron could not be happier. He remained hidden for 5 centuries, but now he was ready again. By SA 1000, he had gathered enough power and established himself in Mordor, in the eastern Middle-earth. He built the Barad-dûr Barad-dûr near Mount Doom. He also had his very own army of orcs, trolls, and whatnot from the time he served Morgoth. But wait, there's more. He also corrupted people from Easterlings and Haradrim with delusions of power and wealth. He knew that men could be corrupted easily, and he was going to use it to his absolute benefit. His passion, rather than an obsession with order, made him want to become a god king. He wanted to wield his temporal power over the whole world and ensure everything was perfect. Sure, men were easier to sway, but there is only so much power that man can give him. He wanted more powers. And so, Sauron decided to reach out to the elves. He knew it would not be easy to get the elves to side with him, but he was willing to do whatever it took. He disguised himself as a fair lord and called himself Anatar, the Lord of Gifts. He became quick friends with elven smiths of Eregion and counseled even the most outstanding craftsman, Celebrimborn, in arts and magic. Will not elves believe him? Some accounts say that he befriended them rather easily. He even managed to develop a stronghold over Gwaith-y Myrddin and pursued the people there to rebel against Lady Galadriel and Celeborn to ensure he could work in Eregion in peace and unopposed. Eventually, he encouraged the elven smiths to take up the task of forging magic rings. These 19 rings are the ones we know as the Rings of Power. To control all the wearers of the rings, Sauron forged the One Ring in secret. One ring to rule them all. One ring to find them. One ring to bring them all, and in the darkness bind them. But when Sauron put on the One Ring, the elves who were wearing the Rings of Power managed to sense Sauron's treacherous intentions. So they took off the rings immediately. While the elves tried their best, only 3 of the greatest Rings of Power were hidden from Sauron. The remaining 16 were either captured by Sauron himself or destroyed. Some of them were simply lost. Sauron gave 7 rings to the dwarves and 9 rings to men. The men were corrupted by the darkness in the rings and became the Nazgûl, Sauron's deadliest servants. Dwarves were able to resist Sauron's will through the ring, but they were overcome with a lust for gold and wealth that was extremely insatiable. Thanks to the Nazgûl, Sauron rose in power and effectively became greater in influence than Morgoth ever was. He came to be known as the Dark Lord to the people free from his grasp, but there were some people he had underestimated, and they were the Númenorians. He was defeated by the Númenorians, and they claimed Sauron as their captive and brought him to the island of Númenor. Now, if there's anything Sauron knew, it was how easily humans could be corrupted. Sauron convinced the proud men of Númenor that they did not need the valor to help them lead the life they were living. In fact, they did not need the valor at all. They were more than wise enough to be the ones in charge, and these proud men fell for his trickery. This act of disrespecting the valor and their gifts was an insolent act. When Iluvatar learned about it, in his wrath, Iluvatar destroyed the island of Númenor. Only a handful of faithful people managed to reach the shores of Middle-earth. This act was also the one that banned man from returning to the Undying Lands where the Valar reside. Unlike the previous time, Sauron did not manage to escape justice. This time, justice was served. This attack from Iluvatar left Sauron's spirit wandering for many years without a body to call home, as it destroyed his physical form. But this was only a bump in Sauron's entire career as an antagonist, and we all know that. So, with such a conniving backstory, does it really surprise any of us that he was so obsessed with power? Absolutely not. So with that backstory investigated, let's move on to his anatomy, starting off strong with what does he look like? Does he have physical form? I mean, come on, guys. Haven't you ever wondered about this? I mean, it's definitely scary to fight an enemy if he doesn't have a physical form, right? Well, J.R.R. Tolkien intentionally remained vague about Sauron's appearance. He wanted to make Sauron a spiritual entity instead of a physical entity. Even when J.R.R. Tolkien painted a picture of Sauron, he made sure to keep his features hidden. He seemed like he was made of living shadows with a gout of flame emerging from his body. Even though you don't see his proper form, the one thing you know for sure is that he is wicked. His intentions are clear, and in this picture, he's reaching out across this vast expanse to grasp everything. One can assume that it's the One Ring, but we don't know for sure. When the War of the Ring took place in the films, Sauron took the form of a humongous eye that was completely in flames right over his fortress at Barad-dûr. The Eye of Sauron isn't originally supposed to be a physical form, rather a symbol of his vigilance, which was more of an an entity that personified his will. While he may not have a physical form, there's no denying that his psychic and spiritual powers are formidable. When Tolkien imagined the origins of the character before time began, Eru created the Valar and the Maiar, the greater and the lesser angels. These angels were supposed to design the progeny of Middle-earth through the so-called music of the Ainur, signifying the wonder and harmony that comes with the creation of the world. The Vala Melkor was the one who decided to create discord by creating things apart from each other. His discord led to the creation of evil, and when he left the company of Valar, he convinced many of the Maiar to follow him. Mairon was one of the Maiars who followed the Valar, and one thing about him that made him different from the rest was he could change his forms and hide his true nature. While he is an angelic spirit, he's able to come off as something else. He had taken the disguise of a vampire and a werewolf whenever it suited him. As I've mentioned before, Sauron could even take the form of a messenger with fair skin and managed to get close to elves when he pretended to be Anatar, Lord of the Gifts. Even when Sauron was captured by the Numerians, that is why he went from being the prisoner of the Numerians to the king's most trusted advisor. He convinced them to launch an attack on the Undying Lands in the west and drove the men apart from the Alliance. When he lost his physical form, he ended up manifesting the glowing eye, which is just as scary of a form as his other forms. So if we had to answer the question in short, Sauron does and does not have a physical form. It completely depends on which one would help his survival. His appearance is also a weapon for Sauron. Is he an elf? While Sauron may look like an elf, don't be fooled like the elves. Sauron is not an elf. He's a Maia, as we mentioned, and like most Maia, Sauron too is able to change his form at his will. He's a shapeshifter, and oh boy, does he use that to his benefit. He took the form of a fair elf to become friends with the elves when he wanted their alliance to gain power. He won their trust, and he became a part of the ranks of the elves. No one had any idea that Sauron was actually evil. That's perhaps why Sauron was able to make the elves craft the rings for him. While the elves created the 19 rings, the actual ring, which would be the master of all, the One Ring, was forged by himself. It was only after he put on this ring that the elves understood who he actually was and how dark his intentions were. When his cover was blown, the elves took off their rings, but Sauron never got to control them. But despite that, as I've described in his origins, Sauron became extremely powerful in Middle-earth. To defeat him, the mighty men of Númenor attacked him, and as I have mentioned, Sauron managed to survive that. That's because when they captured him, Sauron transformed into this beautiful, ethereal, and alluring form. His eyes shone in a beautiful light, and he made sure that the Númenorians knew he had high wisdom and powers, and that it would be a shame to kill him. This is how he managed to get to the King of Númenor and eventually corrupt the Island Kingdom based on Atlantis. Even in the trailer of Rings of Power, Sauron showed up in his beautiful form. He looks almost trustworthy, but we know better, right? Is he the Lord of Werewolf? Whether you admit it or not, in a lot of ways, Sauron was more capricious and scarier than Morgoth was. While Tolkien did not expand upon Sauron's powers, by whatever forms he had taken, it's clear that this man is not someone you can overlook. His reputation is well earned. When Byrne and Finrod were looking for the Silmaril jewels, they had the unlucky opportunity to come face to face with Sauron. Sauron captured them when they were trying to sneak past Tol and Garoth. Despite their orc disguises, Sauron knew who they were, and he wasn't going to show them any mercy. Sauron had created his very own island filled with werewolves, so it was no issue for him to throw these two men in the dungeon with them. He did so to demotivate others from chasing after the jewels, but deep down, he did so to attract one person in particular. Sauron was after Huan, the godlike hound the Valar had created. When one werewolf tried to attack Byrne, Finrod valiantly defeated it, but succumbed to his wounds. Soon after this, Luthien and Huan showed up on the bridge of Tol and Garoth. Sauron sent his servants after Luthien, but all of them were slain by Huan. One of them managed to survive the fight and came back to his master to inform him that Huan had arrived. So Sauron decided to take on the form of a vicious werewolf to fight with him himself. He attacked Luthien first, because of course he did, but Huan managed to fight them off and defeat him. So to save himself from Luthien, Sauron tucked his tail between his two legs, took the form of a vampire, and ran off. Ultimate shapeshifter. What are the other forms of Sauron? I've been harping about 3 of his forms for a while, I know, but that doesn't mean these are the only forms that he has. Sauron actually has quite a few other forms, as he's a rather masterful shapeshifter. When Morgoth was fighting with men, elves, and others, Sauron took the form of a giant serpent to win a few battles. After he rose from being dormant for years, he took on a form which we know as Necromancer. This was his flaming form, which was quite scary to look at. This state was so unsuspecting despite being literally not at all ignorable. Nobody believed Gandalf when he said that the Dark Lord had risen again. It took the wisdom of Gandalf to figure out what the true magnitude of malice was behind the Necromancer of Dol Guldur. When Sauron was finally restored in the Third Age, he didn't show up in his signature physical form with jagged armor. The only way we realized he was Sauron was by Gollum's description of his black hand with 4 fingers. How did he lose his finger? Why can't he regenerate his finger? There's no doubt that Sauron is an extremely powerful being. He's an angel after all. Even if he's a lesser angelic spirit, despite his vast powers, there are some wounds that even he cannot heal. When he lost the Battle of Dagorlad, the loss was not the only disastrous result of the battle. Isildur had cut off his finger at the end of the fight, weakening Sauron significantly due to losing the One Ring by dismemberment. So now, Sauron not only lost a finger, but he also no longer had the ring. In this weakened state, he was far too weak to regrow that finger, which acted as salt on his wound, reminding him of his failure. Does the One Ring possess the powers of Sauron? While the One Ring is not what gave Sauron his powers, it doesn't mean that the One Ring is not an important thing to consider when we're looking at Sauron's powers. Let me explain. Sauron was born as a Maia. Not only that, he was the brightest one of the Maiar. Being Maia gave him quite a huge range of powers. Plus, he learned the ways to create under the tutelage of Aule. So, with all that, he's quite strong, but he was hungry for more power. To ensure he got all of that, he created the One Ring, the master ring to all the rings of power. He created this ring to bring all the people of Middle-earth under his dominion. Clearly, creating this ring was no easy task. So to make the One Ring, he had to use a lot of his willpower. So if we were to explain Sauron's powers in a mathematical way, Sauron plus the One Ring equals full Maia powers. Sauron minus the One Ring equals weakened Sauron, who's still a very formidable power. So in a way, the One Ring does have Sauron's powers inside it, as Sauron gave a lot of his willpower to make it. But the One Ring was also a vessel of Sauron's will to shape the world and its people. So if the One Ring is destroyed, so is his will, and whatever remains is likened by Tolkien to that of a mere memory of his malice, too weak to have a physical form or cause more chaos. What is Sauron's eye? Is it the source of his power? If the Eye of Sauron was not there, Frodo Baggins would have had an easier journey through the plains of Mordor. Well, what is this exactly? The Eye of Sauron, or the Great Eye as one might call it, was a symbol of the Dark Lord. It was said that only a few people could survive the gaze from the Great Eye, as it was just that terrible. In the Third Age, this eye was seen on armor and banners, signifying Sauron's quasi-omniscience. While it's unknown exactly when this eye came into being, one day at the apex of Barad-dûr, the eye was visible. It was flaming and scary to look at. It appeared when the clouds parted in Mordor. Such an ominous introduction to Sauron's ever-presence. In the Lord of the Rings film trilogy, this great eye played a far greater role. This fiery cat-like eyeball at the apex of the Tower of Barad-dûr in the pits of Mordor struck fear in the hearts of all in Middle-earth. This eye was a symbol of Sauron himself. When Sauron finally got the throne in Mordor during the Second Age, he preferred to be called the Eye. This was to instill fear in everyone's heart that, like Big Brother, he was always watching, always knowing everything that was happening around him. This could be one of the reasons why Peter Jackson chose to symbolize Sauron's existence as a burning eye.
My master, Sauron the Great, bids thee welcome.
What is the mouth of Sauron? Now, I know that for absolute newbies, you might end up thinking that the mouth of Sauron is actually his mouth. But the reality is, the mouth of the Sauron is not his mouth. It's actually his most devoted servant. It's even possible that he is the questioner himself, who tormented and interrogated Gollum. His real name is lost. even to himself. He was not like the Nazgul among Sauron's servants, but he was actually a living man at one point. It's said that he was a renegade of the Black Númenorian race. These were a fallen group of Númenorians who were loyal to the Númenorian scepter, but they did not like the Valar or the elves, so they were the perfect choice to be Sauron's followers. The men who dwelled on Middle-earth when Sauron was in power worshipped him for their interest in evil knowledge. In TA 2951, the mouth of Sauron entered the service of the Dark Tower when it finally rose again. As the mouth was rather cunning and shrewd, he quickly rose in the ranks and became one of the Dark Lord's favorite aides. The mouth in turn got to know a lot about Sauron's plans and dreams. The mouth ended up learning a lot of dark sorcery and eventually ended up becoming far crueler than any other orc. In the end, he became the lieutenant of the Tower of Barad-dûr. He was one of the very few servants of Mordor who spoke directly with the Dark Lord. The favoritism that the Dark Lord had for the mouth became more and more prominent as the mouth was the only one who was allowed to use the Dark Lord's elvish name. The mouth rode on a dark steed that could have been a horse, but its hideous appearance made it a sight that anyone would want to look away from. When Gollum was being tortured, the mouth may have overseen it as the questioner to learn who had the One Ring. Can he reproduce? Given that Melian was able to reproduce, it's safe to say that Sauron could have as well. But when Sauron pretended to be Anatar, the Lord of Gifts, he appeared wise and charismatic. At that time, if he had wanted to bed someone and reproduce with them, Sauron very well could have done it. However, while biologically it's possible, I don't think Sauron would have wanted to reproduce with anyone. He hated Luthien, Melian's daughter. Sauron always believed that he did not need to mingle with anyone he thought was lesser than him to ensure he could stay on his grind all the time. So chances of him taking any elven woman as his wife is highly unlikely. Sauron was crafty, and he had no intention of bearing children. He simply wanted to rule over the others, and that he did so easily. He had the mouth of Sauron and other Black Númenorians as his faithful slaves, even if it was out of fear and not respect. So whatever his goals were, he could very well achieve them without having babies. And we can't forget that he lost his ability to create a physical form in the fall of Númenor. So if he hadn't had a baby before, he definitely can't have one now. Is he immortal? The answer to this question is a simple and resounding yes. Ainur was created as spirits. They don't have bodies like you or me. These Ainur, both higher and lesser kinds, can create a physical body and become attached to them, eventually becoming incarnates like us. When this physical body gets injured or dies, the incarnate Ainu dies as well, and the spirit Ainu separates from the body. To create this physical form, some of their power is used up. So when the body of the incarnate Ainu is destroyed, that part of their power is also destroyed. Sauron poured a lot of his powers into the One Ring. While it's true that he never needed the ring with him at all times to use his power, it's irrefutable that whenever Sauron has the ring with him, he is unstoppable. When the ring is destroyed, the majority of Sauron's power, along with his ability to create a physical form, disappears with it. So while his physical form that he may have had, his incarnate Sauron form, is dead, the spirit Sauron lives on. While he may not be able to influence the physical world anymore, he's still breathing, and he is watching. Marvelous verdict. Just like the noseless Dark Lord, this Dark Lord too left quite an impression on us. He's ambitious, dwells in dark magic, and made his very own Horcrux. Now, which one is a better villain or a stronger villain is a topic for another time. While he may not have started off as the main antagonist, Sauron quickly climbed up the ladder and became a far more fearsome antagonist to go against. And we love that. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one, and be safe. Thanks, everyone.